They mocked the old horse tamer, laughed at his age, his calmness, and his strange way of facing danger. They wanted to see him fail, be thrown off, humiliated like a joke forgotten in time. But when chaos took over, it was he who remained steady, while others trembled. Without shouting, without getting worked up, he did the impossible and left everyone silent, swallowing back their spiteful laughter. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Will continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. It was 5 in the morning when Augustus Miller crossed the gates of Horizon Ranch. Dew still covered the tall grass, and the sun barely rehearsed its awakening on the horizon. At 65, Augustus carried on his wrinkled face the marks of a difficult life, but his blue eyes still shone with the same intensity as when he had left exactly 28 years ago. He wore a simple shirt, faded denim pants, and a leather hat worn by time. He brought with him only an old suitcase and a small bag with few possessions. The ranch had changed. The fences were sturdier, the corral expanded, the main house painted, in an ochre tone that didn't exist in his memories. But the smell of damp earth remained the same, as did the birdsong announcing the morning. Augustus breathed deeply, as if wanting to store in his lungs the air of that place he never stopped considering his home, even after so many years of absence. Tyler Vaughn, the current foreman of the ranch, was the first to spot him. Tall, robust, in build and no more than 35 years old, Tyler had grown up hearing stories about Augustus, the legendary horse tamer who one day abandoned everything without explanation. However, the stories he knew weren't exactly flattering. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" asked Tyler gruffly, approaching with firm steps and a suspicious expression. Augustus wasn't intimidated. He removed his hat as a sign of respect and answered with disconcerting calmness, "Augustus Miller. I came to see Mrs. Helen." The name had an immediate effect on the foreman. His eyes narrowed and his posture became even tenser. Mrs. Helen doesn't receive visitors without prior notice, especially so early. "She'll see me," Augustus stated with a certainty that irritated Tyler. The noise attracted the attention of the ranch hands who were already preparing for work. Curious, they formed a semicircle around the two men. The tension was palpable. In the air, as if Augustus's name awakened ghosts that everyone there preferred to keep dormant. "Augustus!" A female voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade. Helen Bradford appeared on the porch of the main house. At 60, she maintained. Her elegant posture, and her brown hair now mixed with silver strands tied in a simple bun. Her eyes, a deep brown, fixed on the newcomer with an indescribable mixture of surprise, hurt, and something else that no one there could decipher. "Helen," Augustus responded, and the tone with which he pronounced that name contained more history than many books could tell. "Let him in, Tyler," she ordered, turning and disappearing inside the house without waiting to see if her order would be obeyed. The foreman swallowed hard, clearly displeased, but moved aside to let Augustus pass. The ranch hands murmured among themselves, some older ones recognizing the visitor, others too young to know who this man was that caused such commotion. Inside the house, time seemed to have frozen. The same dark wood furniture, the same pictures. On the walls, even the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft aroma of roses that Helen had always cultivated. Augustus felt his heart tighten with the familiarity of that environment that for so long had inhabited only his dreams. Helen was waiting for him in the living room. Standing as if sitting before him would be too great a concession for their first reunion. 28 years, Augustus. Not a letter, not a message. "I know, Helen, and I have no excuses to offer. What do you want after so much time?" "To see with my own eyes what I left behind," he answered, repeating the same words he would use many days later when the truths would come to light. Helen studied him for a long moment before indicating a chair. The gesture was small but significant. "Would you like some coffee?" The routine of the ranch followed its course that day, but Augustus's presence was like a stone thrown into still waters. The waves of his arrival spread to every corner, especially for Ryan Bradford, the 27-year-old young man who returned from the field only late in the afternoon. Ryan was the perfect image of what an heir to Horizon should be. Strong, determined, with a deep knowledge of the land and animals. He had grown up under the strict teachings of Anthony Bradford, who had passed away 5 years ago, and the loving, though distant, supervision of Helen. Everyone knew him as the legitimate grandson of Anthony and Helen, son of Claire, who had departed this world giving birth, leaving the boy in the care of his grandparents. When Ryan entered the room and found Augustus sitting at the table with Helen, something imperceptible passed between the three. The young man felt an inexplicable discomfort, as if he were facing a puzzle that his body recognized before his mind could understand. "Ryan, this is Augustus Miller," Helen introduced with a controlled voice. "He worked on this ranch many years." "Ergo." The young man extended his hand reluctantly. "Miller? The horse tamer?" Augustus shook Ryan's hand firmly, his eyes examining every detail of the young man. "The same." "I've heard stories about you," Ryan commented, his tone oscillating between curiosity and distrust. "I imagine you have," Augustus responded, without averting his gaze. Dinner proceeded in a silence loaded with unspoken words. Helen barely touched her food. Ryan observed the visitor with growing uneasiness, noticing gestures, the way he held his cutlery, small details that awakened a strange sense of familiarity. It was Tyler who broke the impasse the next day. Irritated by Augustus's presence, he decided to test him in front of everyone. "If you're really the great horse tamer they say, prove it," he challenged, pointing to the more distant corral. "We've got Thunder there. No one's been able to ride him for months." Augustus looked in the indicated direction. Even from a distance he could see the imposing black horse, muscular with wild eyes, that whinnied and struggled against the corral fences. "I didn't come here to prove anything to anyone," he responded calmly. "Then what did you come to do?" "Disturb the peace we have here," Tyler insisted, raising his voice. "Mrs. Helen may have allowed your entry, but we all know that your presence will only bring problems." Ryan, who was observing the scene, intervened. "If he says he doesn't want to, don't force him, Tyler." But the foreman didn't back down. "Everyone knows the stories. How he abandoned everything overnight, how he left people behind, and now he returns just like that out of the blue." Augustus remained impassive, but his eyes revealed a deep sadness. It was Helen who appeared, attracted by the shouting. "What's happening here?" "Nothing, Mrs. Helen," Tyler answered, trying to soften his tone. "I was just inviting Mr. Miller to show us his skills with Thunder." Helen looked at the distant corral and then at Augustus. Something changed in her countenance, a shadow of concern that didn't go unnoticed by Ryan. "Augustus has nothing to prove," she finally said, "and Thunder is not a toy for demonstrations." But to everyone's surprise, including Helen's, Augustus stepped forward. "I'll see the horse, just see." Tyler smiled maliciously. "We'll see if the legendary horse tamer still has what it takes." As they walked toward the isolated corral, Ryan approached Augustus. "That horse is dangerous. He's already injured 3 men." "Horses aren't born dangerous," Augustus replied. "They become reflections of the treatment they receive." When they reached the corral, Thunder became even more agitated, stomping his hooves forcefully against the ground, raising dust. He was a magnificent animal, shiny black coat, defined musculature, eyes that seemed to contain fire, but the fear and distrust emanating from him were also visible. Augustus stopped a few meters from the fence. He made no move to enter, just stood there observing, while everyone waited for some spectacular action. "What are you waiting for?" Tyler provoked. "The right moment," Augustus replied without taking his eyes off the animal. "Some need silence to be understood." And that's how the first day of Augustus Miller's return to Horizon Ranch ended. With a challenge issued, a mystery hovering in the air, and hearts agitated for reasons that were still hidden in the shadows of the past. The following dawn brought with it the silent expectation that hovered over the ranch. Augustus rose even before the first rays of sun touched the windows of the guest room that had been assigned to him. Helen had insisted that he stay in the main house, a decision that provoked disapproving looks, especially from Tyler. The foreman didn't hide his hostility, as if that older man's presence represented a threat to everything he had built over the years. Dressing simply, Augustus headed to the corral where Thunder remained isolated. He didn't bring ropes, whips, or any taming instruments, just a handful of fresh apples he had requested from the kitchen under the curious gaze of Josephine, the cook who had served him so many times in the past and now watched him as if seeing a ghost. The black horse was still agitated, but something had changed. When Augustus approached the fence, the animal paused for a moment, ears alert, eyes fixed on the man. It was a moment of recognition, not of familiarity, but of identification. Both carried scars, some visible on the skin, others buried much deeper. "I know how you feel," murmured Augustus, sitting on a log near the fence. The distrust, the fear disguised as anger, the desire to flee mixed with the desire to belong. He remained there for hours, just talking in a low voice, sharing stories of distant places he had known, of other horses he had tamed, of mistakes he had made. He made no attempt to enter the enclosure or touch the animal. When the sun was already high, he left the apples on the fence and walked away without looking back. Ryan had observed everything from a distance. There was something about that man that deeply intrigued him. It wasn't just the stories he had heard all his life, but a visceral sensation, as if a part of him recognized something in Augustus that his rational mind couldn't explain. "Aren't you going to try to ride him?" asked Ryan, approaching as Augustus was already walking away. "Riding is the last step, not the first," replied the old horse tamer. "Before that, we need to build trust. My grandfather used to say that horses need to feel who's in charge." Augustus smiled slightly. Anthony was always a man of traditional methods, efficient but not always the gentlest. The way he spoke Anthony Bradford's name revealed an intimacy that surprised Ryan. It wasn't the respectful and distant tone that most employees used when referring to the former boss, but that of someone who had known him well, with his virtues and flaws. "Did you know my grandfather well?" asked Ryan as they walked back to the ranch headquarters. "We grew up together," Augustus replied simply. "We knew every corner of this land even before we knew our own names." Ryan wanted to ask more questions, but they were interrupted by Tyler, who approached with a closed expression. "Mrs. Helen wants to see you," announced the foreman, addressing Augustus. "And as for you, Ryan, the men are waiting for your directions for handling the cattle in the north pasture." The young man hesitated, torn between curiosity about the conversation Augustus would have with his grandmother and his responsibilities. On the ranch, he opted for duty, but the uneasiness remained. Helen was waiting for Augustus in her office, a room that had previously belonged to Anthony. Little had changed there as well. The massive hardwood desk, shelves with books on agriculture and livestock, trophies from cattle exhibitions. The only addition was a photograph of Ryan, smiling at his graduation next to the old portrait of Claire, his mother. "Have you seen him?" asked Helen without preamble, as soon as Augustus entered. "Yes," he answered, immediately understanding who she was referring to. "He has your eyes." Helen looked away, the emotion visible on her normally composed face. "He knows nothing, Augustus, and I don't know if he should know. Everyone deserves to know the truth about their origins, Helen." "The truth?" she repeated bitterly. "The truth is that you left, that you abandoned him before he was even born, that for 28 years, while Anthony and I raised him, you never sent a single letter to know if he was alive or not." The sea. Words hit Augustus like whiplashes, but he didn't back down. "I knew he would be fine with you, better than with me." "How can you say that? How can you justify abandonment?" "I'm not justifying. I'm trying to explain. There are things about my departure that you don't know, Helen." She stood up, anger finally breaking her composure. "What I know is that Claire never recovered, that she withered like a flower without sun after you left, that on the day Ryan was born, she didn't have the strength to fight for her own life, because you had taken all her will to live." Augustus closed his eyes as if each word were a physical blow. When he opened them again, they were moist. "I loved her, Helen, more than you could ever understand." "Love." Helen laughed without humor. "Love doesn't abandon, Augustus. Love stays, faces, fights. Sometimes leaving is the only way to protect those you love." The enigma in that phrase made Helen frown. Protect from what? What were you running from, Augustus? Before he could answer, they were interrupted by shouts coming from the yard. They ran to the porch in time to see Thunder galloping uncontrollably among the sheds, having somehow escaped from the isolated corral. Ranch hands ran in all directions, trying to contain him, but the black horse, in panic, became increasingly dangerous. "My God," whispered Helen, bringing her hands to her mouth when she saw Ryan appear, trying to intercept the animal. Without hesitation, Augustus descended the porch steps with a surprising impulse for his age. While everyone shouted and ran, he went in the opposite direction, positioning himself calmly in the center of the yard, directly in the path of the runaway horse. "Get out of there!" yelled Tyler, but Augustus remained motionless. When Thunder saw him, something incredible happened. The horse slowed down, still agitated, but clearly recognizing the impassive figure in front of him. Augustus didn't move, didn't raise his hands, didn't try to grab the loose reins. He just maintained eye contact and began to speak softly, words that no one else could hear. The horse stopped a few meters from him, snorting and pawing the ground with his hooves, muscles trembling beneath the sweaty coat. For long seconds, man and animal remained like this in a silent duel of wills. Then slowly Augustus extended his hand, not to dominate, but to offer peace. Thunder hesitated, stepped back, but something in Augustus's gaze kept him there. Finally, the horse approached and touched his muzzle to the extended palm. A collective sigh ran through the small crowd that had formed. Ryan watched the scene with widened eyes, a strange sensation growing in his chest. There was something familiar in that gesture, in that way of softly whistling that Augustus had begun to do, a distant echo of memories he didn't know he possessed. "How did he do that?" murmured one of the younger ranch hands. "Black magic," replied another, making the sign of the cross. Tyler observed with his face contorted in an expression difficult to decipher. It wasn't just anger, but something more complex, as if Augustus's demonstration threatened not only his position but his own convictions. On the porch, Helen remained motionless, silent tears running down her face. Seeing him there with that innate gift he had always possessed brought back memories she had fought to bury, of a time when Claire, her only daughter, looked at Augustus as if he were the sun itself, of promises made under the starry sky, of secrets kept under lock and key. When Augustus finally managed to lead Thunder back to the corral, without ropes or force, just with his calm presence, the atmosphere on the ranch had changed. Reluctant respect was beginning to replace open hostility, at least among the ranch hands who witnessed the feat. Ryan was the first to approach when Augustus closed the corral gate. "That was incredible," said the young man, genuine admiration in his voice. "I've never seen anything like it." "Your grandfather could do the same when he had the patience for it," replied Augustus, and there was a nostalgic tone in his voice that Ryan didn't fully understand. "My grandfather?" "Anthony Bradford tamed without using force." Augustus smiled slightly. "When young, yes. Later, life hardened him. Circumstances don't always allow us to maintain the gentleness we carry in our hearts." There was so much untold history in those words that Ryan felt a shiver run down his spine. Who really was this man who knew his grandfather so well, who tamed horses with a look, who made his grandmother cry silently on the porch? "Why did you leave?" Ryan asked abruptly. "Why abandon everything?" The question caught Augustus by surprise. For a moment, his gaze was lost on the horizon, as if seeking the answer in the distant mountains. "Some departures aren't abandonments, Ryan. They're sacrifices." Before Ryan could insist, Tyler appeared again. "Mrs. Helen wants to see you both," he announced, the displeasure evident in his voice. "Now." In the living room of the main house, Helen had recovered her composure. Sitting in her favorite armchair, she seemed to have made a decision during the brief interval. "Ryan," she began, her voice firm despite the contained emotion, "there's something you need to know about Augustus Miller." The young man looked from his grandmother to the old horse Tamer, anxiety growing in his chest. Augustus remained silent, his face unreadable, but his hands were slightly trembling. He wasn't just an employee of this ranch, Helen continued, the words coming out with difficulty. He is. At that moment, the sound of hooves approaching interrupted her words. Through the window they saw a rider approaching at an accelerated gallop. It was Michael, one of the youngest ranch hands, and the urgency in his arrival indicated problems. "Mrs. Helen," he shouted, jumping from his horse before it even came to a complete stop. "The cattle in the north pasture. Someone cut the fences during the night. The animals are scattering across the slope." The revelation would have to wait. Ryan was already running to the door, followed by Augustus. Helen stayed behind, the opportunity lost, the unspoken words weighing in her chest like stones. The chaos in the north pasture required the attention of all the men on the ranch. The fences had been cut at strategic points, allowing nearly 100 head of cattle to escape to areas of difficult access. It didn't seem to be a coincidence. Someone knew the property well and knew exactly where to cause the most damage with minimal effort. Ryan, Augustus, and Tyler led different groups to recover the scattered animals. The tension between the three was palpable, but the emergency required focus. It was during this operation that Ryan witnessed another demonstration of Augustus's exceptional abilities. The old horse Tamer not only managed to gather more animals than any other group, but did so without shouting or violence, guiding the cattle with precise whistles and an almost supernatural understanding of animal behavior. When they finally returned to the ranch exhausted and covered in dust, it was already dark. Helen was waiting for them on the porch, her face marked with concern. "We managed to recover almost all of them," Ryan informed, dismounting with difficulty from his horse. "We lost 8 steers that fell into the ravine, but it could have been much worse." Helen nodded, relieved, but her gaze fixed on Augustus, who was dismounting more slowly, the fatigue evident in his movements. "Are you all right?" "I'm old, not invalid," he replied with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. Tyler observed the exchange with displeasure. "I'll check if the men are reinforcing the fences correctly," he announced, moving away with stiff steps. After a bath and a late meal, Ryan found Augustus sitting on the back porch, contemplating the stars with a glass of whiskey in his hands. The day's fatigue had given way to a thoughtful quietude. "May I join you?" asked Ryan, indicating the empty chair beside him. Augustus made a gesture of invitation and offered the bottle, which Ryan accepted, serving himself moderately. "Where did you learn to work like that with the animals?" asked the young man after a few moments of comfortable silence. "You don't learn exactly," replied Augustus, swirling the liquid in the glass. "It's more like awakening something that already exists inside us, the ability to listen beyond words, to understand the language of silence." "My grandfather tried to teach me that," confessed Ryan, "but he always said I was too impatient." "Like your mother," Augustus commented softly, and then seemed to realize he had said something he shouldn't have. Ryan straightened in his chair. "You knew my mother, Claire?" A long silence followed the question. Augustus looked at the stars as if seeking guidance in the night sky. "Yes," he finally answered, "I knew Claire very well." The way he pronounced the name with such tenderness awakened in Ryan a sudden and disturbing intuition. "Were you close?" Augustus turned to face him directly. Something in his gaze made Ryan hold his breath, a mixture of old pain and a love so deep that it seemed to transcend time. "Claire was the great love of my life," confessed Augustus with a choked voice, "and I was hers." The revelation fell on Ryan like a bolt from the blue. 1,000 questions arose in his mind, but before he could articulate any of them, Helen's voice sounded behind them, loaded with repressed emotion. "I was going to tell him this morning before the emergency with the cattle." Both men turned. Helen stood in the doorway, a carved wooden box in her hands, her face a mask of determination despite the tears that threatened to fall. "Tell me what?" asked Ryan, although a part of him already knew the answer, a truth that his heart recognized before his mind could accept. Helen approached and sat down in front of them, placing the box on the small table. "The truth about who you are, Ryan, about your real father." The world seemed to stop at that moment. Ryan looked from Helen to Augustus, seeking denial, but finding only silent confirmation in the old horse tamer's gaze. Anthony wasn't my grandfather. He was my No, Helen gently interrupted. Anthony was your grandfather. Claire was indeed my daughter. But the man you knew as your grandfather was not your biological father. She took a deep breath before continuing. Augustus is your father. The words hung in the air, forever altering Ryan's world. The young man stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair, his hands trembling. That's impossible, he murmured, backing up a few steps. Why would you lie to me all my life? To protect you, replied Helen, opening the wooden box and removing an envelope yellowed by time. And to protect your mother's reputation. Protect from what? Demanded Ryan, his voice rising with the anger and confusion that were beginning to take hold of him. From me, said Augustus, also standing up, or rather, from the shadow that pursued me. Helen extended the envelope to Ryan. This letter explains part of the story. Augustus sent this shortly after leaving, the only communication in 28 years. With trembling hands, Ryan opened the envelope and unfolded the aged paper. The handwriting was firm, but hurried, as if written in a moment of great agitation. Helen, when you read these words, I'll already be far away. I cannot fully explain the reasons for my departure, as doing so would put all of you in danger. Know only that I did not abandon Claire and our son for lack of love. On the contrary, it is because I love them too much that I must keep them away from the danger that follows me. Take care of them for me. Tell Claire that I will always love her in every breath, in every beat of my heart. As for our son, it's better that he grows up without knowing about me. Anthony will be a better father than I could ever be under the current circumstances. One day, perhaps, when it's safe, I'll return. Until then, I live with the hope that you will forgive me, Augustus. Ryan let the letter fall, the shock giving way to an anger that grew with each second. What danger? What circumstances? This explains nothing. It only creates more questions. No, agreed Augustus, taking a hesitant step toward his son. And you deserve all the answers, Ryan. But some truths are too complex to be told all at once. Try, demanded Ryan, his eyes flashing with a contained fury that very much resembled Augustus himself in his younger years. Helen picked up the wooden box again, removing a small faded photograph. This is your mother, at 19, with Augustus. It was taken a few months before you were born. In the image, a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes smiled radiantly beside a much younger Augustus. The love between them was so visible that it almost jumped off the paper. Did Claire know she was pregnant when you left? Asked Ryan, addressing Augustus with a tense voice. Yes, replied the old horse tamer, the guilt evident on his face. We discovered it together, 2 weeks before my departure. We were planning to tell Helen and Anthony, to publicly acknowledge our love, to marry, and then you simply ran away. The incredulity in Ryan's voice was cutting. It wasn't simple, Augustus answered, the old pain making his voice hoarse. It was the most difficult decision of my life. Helen, realizing it was time for the complete truth, took a deep breath. Ryan, before working here, Augustus witnessed a crime committed by powerful people in the region. He testified against these people, and because of that, he became a target. When he discovered that Claire was pregnant, he received direct threats, not just against him, but against her and the child to come. Ryan turned to Augustus, who confirmed with a nod. They were influential people with connections at all levels. The police, politicians, even the judicial system, all were bought. I had no way to protect Claire and you by staying here. So you thought it better to abandon her? Ryan couldn't hide the bitterness in his voice. I thought that without me you would be safe, explained Augustus, his eyes moist. That if I disappeared, the danger would disappear too. It was an error in judgment that I paid for with 28 years of solitude, knowing that I had lost everything I loved most. Helen stood up, approaching Ryan. Claire never completely overcame Augustus's disappearance. When you were born, she was weakened, not just by the difficult birth, but by the sadness that consumed her from within. We tried everything, but her voice failed. But she didn't make it, completed Ryan, the anger giving way to a deep sadness. "Anthony and I decided to raise you as our grandson," Helen continued after regaining her composure, "to protect Claire's memory and to protect you. At the time, being the child of an unmarried mother, especially in these lands where traditions weigh heavily, would have made your life much more difficult." Ryan moved away, walking to the porch railing, trying to absorb the whirlwind of revelations. For long minutes, only the sound of crickets and the wind in the leaves of the trees broke the silence. "Why come back now?" he finally asked without turning. "After so much time." Augustus hesitated, exchanging a significant look with Helen. "Because it's finally safe. The men who threatened me have unfortunately passed on or are in prison. I spent years gathering evidence against them from a distance to ensure they could never harm anyone again." "And you think that justifies it?" Ryan turned, tears finally escaping from his eyes. "That arriving here after 28 years, when I've already built my entire life without you, compensates for decades of absence?" "No," replied Augustus, with painful sincerity. "It doesn't justify, it doesn't compensate. I don't expect your forgiveness, Ryan. I came only so that you would know the truth, so that you would understand that it wasn't abandonment but sacrifice, and to see at least once in my life the man my son has become." The raw emotion in those words hit Ryan like a wave. His anger didn't disappear, but something else began to emerge beside it, a reluctant understanding, the beginning of acceptance. It was at this moment that heavy footsteps sounded on the porch stairs. Tyler appeared, his face tense and worried. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, looking specifically at Helen, "but we found something on the cut fences. It wasn't an accident or common vandalism. There were marks, a signature we hadn't seen in years." Helen visibly paled. "It can't be." "What is it?" asked Ryan, noticing the sudden change in the atmosphere. Augustus stepped forward, suddenly alert. "What kind of mark, Tyler?" The foreman hesitated, looking from Helen to Augustus, clearly reluctant to speak in the latter's presence. "Tell us," ordered Helen. "An M crossed by a vertical line," Tyler finally answered. "The same symbol that appeared in the threats 28 years ago." The blood seemed to drain from Augustus's face. "Murphy," he whispered, "but that's impossible." "He's dead?" completed Tyler with a humorless laugh. "It seems not, or someone is using his symbol." Ryan looked confused at the three adults, whose expressions revealed a terror that he didn't fully understand. "Who is Murphy?" he asked. "The man who swore to destroy your family," replied Augustus, his voice now firm despite the visible fear in his eyes. "The man I tried to protect you from by leaving, and if he's back, then the danger never really passed." The revelation about Murphy transformed the atmosphere at Horizon Ranch. What had previously been a family reunion loaded with emotions became a situation of constant alert. Helen gathered all trusted employees to reinforce security, double the night rounds, and check every inch of the fences. Ryan, still processing the discovery about his true origin, found himself divided between the anger he felt toward Augustus and the undeniable concern for everyone's safety. The morning after discovering the symbol on the fences, Augustus woke before dawn. Silently, he collected his few belongings and headed to the back door, determined to leave without being noticed. If Murphy was truly alive and had tracked him there, the best way to protect Helen and Ryan would be to distance himself again. "Where are you going?" Ryan's voice surprised him when he was already on the porch. Augustus turned slowly. His son was sitting in the shadows as if he had been waiting for hours. The young man seemed not to have slept, his eyes red from fatigue or perhaps from contained tears. "I'm doing what I should do," replied Augustus, placing his suitcase on the ground, "removing the danger from you." "Like 28 years ago?" Ryan stood up, approaching. "Running away again?" "It's not running when it's done for protection." "That's what you tell yourself to justify abandonment," retorted Ryan, the hurt evident in his voice. Then, surprisingly, his expression softened. "But this time I won't allow it." Augustus frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "That I won't let you repeat the same mistake," replied Ryan firmly. "If this man, Murphy, is really a threat, we'll face him together. No more secrets, no more running. It's time to break the cycle, Father." The last word came out hesitantly, as if Ryan were testing it for the first time. The effect on Augustus was immediate and visible. His eyes watered, and his hands, normally steady, trembled slightly. "You don't understand the danger," insisted Augustus, although his resolution clearly wavered. "Eugene Murphy isn't an ordinary man. He has resources, contacts, and more importantly, he has an obsession, a vengeance he has pursued for decades." "Then tell me everything," demanded Ryan. "The complete truth. What happened between you that created so much hatred?" Augustus hesitated, looking at the dawn that was beginning to tinge the horizon. Finally, he nodded and sat back down. "I grew up with Anthony on this ranch," he began, his low voice laden with memories. "Our parents worked together. We were almost like brothers. When he inherited Horizon, he invited me to be his foreman. Those were good years, prosperous ones, until I met your mother, Claire." Ryan sat beside him, absorbing every word with intense attention. "Claire was pure light," continued Augustus, a sad smile forming on his wrinkled face. "Intelligent, determined, full of dreams. We fell in love immediately, even knowing the complications. Anthony and Helen had planned another future for her, a marriage with the son of a neighboring rancher that would consolidate lands and fortunes." "Eugene Murphy," deduced Ryan. Augustus nodded. Murphy Jr. was the chosen suitor, but Claire categorically refused. When he discovered that the reason was me, a simple employee with no possessions or family name, his hatred became dangerous. At first there were just threats, intimidations. Then one day I witnessed something I should never have seen. "The crime you mentioned yesterday?" "Yes. Eugene and his father were involved in a land-grabbing scheme. Not just that, as they used violence, threats, even caused events to expel families of small landowners. I witnessed one of these moments and naively believed that justice would prevail if I reported it." Augustus breathed deeply before continuing, the weight of those memories still visible in his countenance. "After my testimony, the Murphy family temporarily lost its influence. Eugene swore vengeance, not just against me, but against everyone I loved. When I discovered that Claire was pregnant, I received a clear message. Either I disappeared forever, or both she and the child would suffer the consequences. Knowing Murphy's cruelty, I didn't doubt his word." "So you left to protect us," murmured Ryan, understanding finally making way in his heart. "Yes, I believed my absence would keep you safe, that Murphy would lose interest if I was far away. For years I lived like a ghost, moving from town to town, always attentive to news from here. When I learned of your mother's passing..." Augustus's voice failed. "It was the darkest day of my life. I thought about returning, but I still feared the repercussions." "And what changed now?" asked Ryan. 3 months ago, I received news that Eugene Murphy had suffered a serious accident. The newspapers reported his death. Finally, I thought, it was safe to return to meet my son to try to explain." Augustus shook his head. "But it seems I was deceived. If that mark truly belongs to Murphy, then he's alive and more dangerous than ever." Dawn had fully established itself when Helen found them on the porch, still talking. The surprise on her face at seeing Augustus with his packed suitcase gave way to an iron determination when Ryan explained the situation. "No one is leaving," she declared firmly. "This ranch has seen too many losses because of that man. It's time to face him, not to run." "Helen," Augustus began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. "No, Augustus. For 28 years, I've lived with the remorse of not having done more to protect Claire, of not having fought against the Murphys when I had the chance. I won't make the same mistake twice." A sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the conversation. Tyler appeared, breathless, his face contorted in an expression of alarm. "Thunder escaped again," he announced. "Someone deliberately opened the corral gate. And there's more. We found another symbol, this time carved on the door of the main stable." Augustus rose immediately. "He's here, on the property." Ryan and Helen exchanged looks of concern. "I'll gather the men," said the young man, already heading for the yard. "Wait," asked Augustus, holding his son's arm. "Murphy isn't a man for direct confrontations. He prefers psychological games, terrorizing before attacking. Releasing thunder wasn't just a distraction. It was a message for me." "What message?" asked Helen. "That even the wildest can be controlled," replied Augustus, his gaze lost in the direction of the empty corral, "and that he has power over everything that matters to me." "We need to find Thunder," decided Ryan. "The horse might be in danger." As the ranch hands organized into search groups, a fine rain began to fall, making visibility difficult and erasing possible tracks. Augustus, however, seemed to have an intuition about where to look. "The creek clearing," he said to Ryan, who accompanied him closely. "It was your mother's favorite spot. If Murphy wants me to come to him, he'll choose a significant place." Father and son rode together, crossing pastures and entering the denser area of vegetation that marked the property boundaries. The creek, normally tranquil, was agitated with the intensifying rain. When they reached the clearing, Augustus's heart tightened. There was Thunder, restless, tied to a tree. "Wait," whispered Augustus, holding Ryan's arm when he made a move to advance. "It's a trap." As if to confirm his words, a figure emerged from among the trees. Eugene Murphy had aged, but maintained the arrogant posture and cold gaze that Augustus remembered so well. His hair, now completely white, was impeccably combed despite the rain, and his fine suit contrasted with the rural environment. "Almost 3 decades, Miller," said Murphy, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I must admit that you made me wait longer than I would have liked." Augustus dismounted slowly, signaling for Ryan to remain where he was. "I thought you were dead, Murphy." "Many thought so," replied the man, approaching a few steps. "A useful strategy when one wants to observe closely without being noticed. I see you've met your son, an impressive young man. I must say, he has his mother's eyes." The mention of Claire made Augustus's blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "What do you want? Revenge? Haven't you caused enough destruction?" Murphy laughed, a sound devoid of any genuine joy. "Destruction? I merely fulfilled a promise. You destroyed my reputation, my future, my family. I swore I would do the same to you, and I succeeded, didn't I? You lost Claire, you lost the chance to see your son grow up." "And now?" asked Augustus, stepping forward despite the rain that fell more intensely. "You came to finish the job?" "I came to offer a choice," replied Murphy, his voice almost inaudible under the sound of the growing storm. "The same choice from 28 years ago. Leave, disappear forever, and your precious family will live in peace. Stay." He made a vague gesture with his hand. "Well, I believe you know the consequences." Ryan, who had been listening to everything, with growing indignation could no longer contain himself. He dismounted and positioned himself beside Augustus. "You no longer have that power," declared the young man, confronting Murphy with the same determination he had inherited from his parents. "This land is ours, this life is ours, and Augustus stays." Murphy observed Ryan with curiosity, as if studying an interesting specimen. "So much like your mother, the same stubbornness, the same inability to see the consequences." "It's you who doesn't see, Murphy," intervened Augustus, his voice gaining strength. "Look around. The world has changed. Your threats no longer have the same power. I know about all your crimes. I've documented every irregularity, every act of violence. If anything happens to anyone on this ranch, there are letters ready to be delivered to the authorities, to the press, to people who can't be bought." For the first time, Murphy's confidence seemed to waver. "Bluff," he muttered, but without the same conviction. "Test me," challenged Augustus. "I've lost too much to be afraid of you. But you, Murphy, what do you have to lose now? Freedom in your final years of life." Lightning illuminated the clearing, followed by the thunder that frightened the horses. Taking advantage of the distraction, Murphy drew a gun, pointing it in Augustus's direction. "I should have done this 28 years ago," he said, his finger tense on the trigger. What happened next was so fast that afterward, none of those present could describe the exact sequence of events. Thunder, frightened by the thunder and the tension in the air, managed to break the ropes that held him. In his frightened fury, the animal charged across the clearing, passing dangerously close to Murphy. The man, surprised by the sudden movement, instinctively fired the gun, not to hit Augustus or Ryan, but in a reaction of panic. The shot, however, ended up hitting a nearby tree. The noise aggravated Thunder's panic even more as he reared up, his front hooves striking the air inches from Murphy. In a purely instinctive movement, Augustus jumped to protect the man who seconds before had threatened his life. He pushed Murphy away from the horse's trajectory, both falling heavily on the muddy ground. When Ryan managed to control Thunder and turn to the two men, he found them lying in the mud, Augustus breathing heavily, Murphy looking at him with an expression of absolute perplexity. "Why?" asked Murphy, when he finally recovered his speech. "Why protect me?" Augustus sat up with difficulty, age and sudden exertion taking their toll. "Because the cycle needs to be broken, Murphy. Someone needs to have the courage to stop it." Something changed in the old rancher's eyes, a flash of understanding, perhaps even shame. Slowly he sat up as well, ignoring the mud that ruined his expensive suit. 28 years, murmured Murphy, looking at the gun that lay useless a few meters away. "I dedicated almost 3 decades of my life to a vengeance that no longer makes sense." "It never did," replied Augustus simply. A strange silence fell over the three men, broken only by the sound of the rain and the occasional whinnies of Thunder, now calmer under Ryan's touch. It was the young man who finally spoke. "It's over. Mr. Murphy, go away, leave my family in peace, not out of fear of your threats, but because it's time for all of us to move forward." Murphy looked at Ryan for a long moment, then at Augustus. Something in his posture seemed to have fundamentally changed, as if an invisible weight had been removed. "She really loved you," he finally said to Augustus. "Claire, she never looked at me the way she looked at you. At the time, that fueled my hatred. Now it just makes me feel tired." Slowly, with the dignity of someone making a difficult decision, Murphy stood up. "I won't bother you again," he declared, looking directly into Augustus's eyes. "You're right, the cycle needs to be broken." With those words, he walked toward the edge of the forest, disappearing among the trees without looking back. Ryan helped Augustus to his feet. "Do you think we can trust him?" "Yes," replied Augustus after a moment of reflection. "He found the same thing I did, the realization that some battles aren't worth a lifetime." Together, father and son mounted their horses, with Thunder following peacefully beside them. The rain began to diminish, and a pale ray of sunlight made its way through the clouds. When they returned to the ranch, Helen was anxiously waiting for them on the porch, accompanied by Tyler and several armed ranch hands, ready to set out in search of them. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying down the stairs as she saw them covered in mud but apparently unharmed. Ryan and Augustus exchanged a knowing look before responding in unison. "It's over." That night, gathered in the living room of the main house, Helen, Augustus and Ryan talked like a family for the first time. There were still wounds to heal, forgiveness to grant, a father-son relationship to build practically from scratch. But the first step, the hardest one, had been taken. "What happens now?" asked Ryan, when the night was already advanced. "Now," replied Augustus, looking tenderly at Helen and his son, "now we start again, one day at a time." Helen smiled, taking both their hands in hers. "Claire would be proud of both of you." In the weeks that followed, Horizon Ranch witnessed a gradual transformation. Augustus took on a role in management, working side by side with Ryan. His experience with animals proved to be a valuable asset, especially in training horses. Thunder, in particular, had become almost inseparable from him, following him across the pasture like a faithful dog. Tyler, initially resistant to Augustus's permanent presence, ended up recognizing the value of the old horse Tamer. A silent truce established itself between them, slowly evolving into mutual respect. On a sunny afternoon, Ryan found Augustus in the old corral, now renovated, watching the sunset with a serene expression. "I've been thinking," said the young man leaning on the fence beside his father, "about expanding the ranch, not just with cattle, but with a training center for horses, using your methods." Augustus looked at his son with surprise and emotion. My methods. Of respect, of patience, explained Ryan. What you did with Thunder, it could help many other animals and many other men. The old horse tamer smiled, genuine emotion illuminating his face marked by time. It would be an honor to pass on this knowledge. And I thought of a name, too, continued Ryan, a special gleam in his eye. Claire Miller Training Center, in honor of my mother. Augustus's eyes filled with tears. Without words, he just hugged his son, an embrace that carried decades of contained love, of overcome regrets, of renewed hope. On the horizon, the sun was slowly descending, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Thunder approached, tranquilly, followed by a young mare that Ryan was training. The animals stopped near the two men, as if also contemplating the spectacle of the sunset. "Do you know what your mother used to say?" Augustus asked softly, still embracing his son. "What?" "That the sun never really sets. It just illuminates other places, other lives, before returning to us." Ryan smiled, feeling a connection with the mother he never knew, through the words and love of his newly found father. "We're rebuilding what was broken," said the young man, "one piece at a time." "Yes," agreed Augustus, the gratitude evident in his voice. "And this time I'll stay to see each sunrise." The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Augustus and Ryan's journey has touched your hearts. To continue immersing yourself in equally moving stories, we've prepared a special list with narratives that explore family ties, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring new stories that reveal the beauty and complexity of human relationships. Share with us